For China, EVs are the only way to take over the automotive industry, and until recently, it looked like things were going in a pretty good direction, but not anymore. The global EV growth has slowed down significantly, while the vast majority of Chinese car makers are losing millions and are close to bankruptcy. Moreover, the domestic car market is slowing down too, so it's not rare to hear from experts that the Chinese EV market is way worse than we thought. Why is that? We found 7 good reasons. Number 7. The Chinese car market is in decline. Before we start with more specific reasons, let's start with general things. When you look at the overall Chinese car market, things are not as good as they seemed a few years ago. Namely, now the former world's largest population had impressive economic growth over the last few decades, and that was followed by the massive growth of the automotive market. As mobility was becoming more and more affordable to Chinese citizens, the number of citizens on the road was getting bigger, and the peak was 7 years ago, when a total of 24 million new vehicles were sold across China. From today's perspective, that definitely was the peak, because since then, things have been going in the opposite direction. It's not a drastic drop, but it's still an obvious indicator. The last year ended with a little bit over 21 million new cars sold in China, and we're talking about a couple of million there. That's a lot, even for China. Of course, these numbers refer to the overall car market, including both electric and ICE cars, but with the overall market going down, it's obvious that there's less potential for further EV growth. Just like in other parts of the world, the years 2020, 2021, and 2022 brought impressive market growth, but things started slowing down in the last year. 2023 ended with a quite modest 31% growth, and the trend of falling down continued through the first quarter of 2024. The reasons why EV sales are dropping are numerous, and one of them may be the end of early adopters phase, but let's not neglect the fact that the Chinese economy is in stagnation at the moment. Number 6. Chinese economy struggles. EV growth is slowing down while the overall car market is in decline, and the reasons are numerous. Still, one of the major contributors is the fact that the Chinese economy, after decades of significant expansion, is showing signs of fatigue. There's no word about rapid growth anymore. The economy has reached its peak, and now it grows on par or even slower than some Western economies. The projected growth for this year is 4%, but what's more intriguing is that the real estate market is near collapse. Combined with high unemployment rates as well as an aging population, all this contributes to the overall economic slowdown, especially when it comes to consumer spending among the middle class. Then there's the banking system, which is also far from great. Moreover, the government has been taking various measures to add liquidity, so when we put all these things together, it becomes pretty obvious why things are far from great on the Chinese EV market. Number 5. Chinese brands are still unable to spend. For all these years, Chinese authorities have been boosting the growth of the EV industry. Today, the production is bigger than ever, but the industry has started to show one pretty weak spot. Namely, Chinese EV brands are still unable to establish themselves in Western markets. It was believed that these brands would easily take over EV markets like Europe, but it turns out that that's far from true. Today, most Chinese EV players still play marginal roles in most abroad markets. Just take BYD as an example. The Chinese, and probably the world's leading EV company, sells millions of electric and hybrid vehicles on a yearly basis. It has some of the best technologies in the business as well, but even today, most of its sales are on the domestic market. Approximately 95% of all BYD cars are sold in China, and things aren't different with most other brands. And now, when the domestic market has slowed down significantly, even the biggest names in the business are forced to offer massive discounts just to sell their inventory. Number 4. EV graveyards all around China. Today, it's clear that Chinese EV growth was mainly based on government incentives. As for the basic principles of the economy, they were never important all that much, and if you need proof, just take a look at the so-called EV graveyards around China. Pretty much every bigger city has it, and if you wonder what's the deal with these, here's a quick explanation. We presume you know that Chinese authorities were giving and still give massive support to EV companies. By the middle of the last decade, everyone was in the EV business business apparently. According to various sources, there were more than 500 registered EV makers, and all those needed to sell a certain number of vehicles to remain eligible for the incentives. So they made a deal with car renting companies that, it'll turn out later, never had the intention to use these EVs because most of them were underperformers in every aspect. They weren't good enough, so even though they registered, they ended up in so-called graveyards. No one wants them, so they're left rotting away in the fields, thousands of them in every bigger city in China. Number 3. Small startups don't have a chance. Of these aforementioned 500 registered EV makers, the vast majority were startups, and as most of them never reached decent sales numbers and got to the production volume that would potentially lead to making a profit, it doesn't surprise that most of them ended pretty unsuccessfully. Today, most of these startups are already bankrupted, and sources suggest that there are around 90 companies left in the business. But even that number is too big, because if you look at the market and sales figures, it turns out that the top 10 EV brands in China account for 80% of the EV sales. For the rest of the pack, there isn't much left. Approximately 1/3 of them produce less than 500 EVs quarterly, so it's obvious that sooner or later, they will all face the inevitable. What's particularly intriguing is that even the richest startups, those with huge starting capital, often end in bankruptcy. Take a look at Evergrande New Energy Auto, a company that was part of one of the largest conglomerates in this part of the world. Even pretty much endless resources weren't enough for the startup to become a major player in the market. No, this was one of the many companies that filed for bankruptcy, and if we take the company's minor sales numbers into account, it turns out that it has lost $17 million on every EV it has ever sold. Examples like this are numerous. For example, VW started with a $5.3 billion capital, but now is desperately looking for new investors. Things in SAIC, the state-owned company, aren't much better either. Number 2. Small startups are out, huge consumer electronics makers are in. The competition has just gotten fiercer in the Chinese EV market because now even companies like Huawei and Xiaomi are competing in, for them, a new industry. Known for their global success in consumer electronics and the high-tech industry, the two companies now also come to heat up the EV market even more. In normal circumstances, this would be a good thing, considering that tougher competition is always beneficial for the customer. But these are pretty odd times, and with the additional pressure put on manufacturers, this could only speed up the fall for many of them. Anyway, Huawei launched a model called the S7, priced at around 285,000 yuan, which would be around $35,500 according to the current exchange rates. And by just one look at this large sedan based on a mighty 800-volt battery architecture, it was clear that it was imagined as a Tesla Model S competitor. Things aren't much different with Xiaomi's EV either, which is even cheaper, priced at a little bit over $30,000. And this one, among other amenities, also offers a quite impressive 435-mile range. Number 1. The bloodbath has begun. With the market growth slowing down significantly, a disrupted balance between supply and demand comes as a natural outcome. In such a set of circumstances, car makers are forced to figure out new ways on how to compete. The market is getting more and more demanding, so slashing prices is the only thing left to do for many, including the biggest players in the market like BYD. This company started giving massive discounts, and it was soon followed by pretty much every single automaker in China, not just in the EV segment, but among legacy ICE manufacturers as well. Cars have never been cheaper in China, and we're now wondering how long this could take. The strategy of big players is to use this price war to wipe out small fish and take over the complete market, but even they're struggling to survive. In other words, this EV bloodbath has started. As we already mentioned, the top 10 EV makers already take 80% of the market, so it doesn't surprise that experts suggest that out of the remaining EV companies, at least 70% will go out of business pretty soon. Even the major companies are feeling anxious, so statements like the one from the Li Auto CEO saying that companies need to join together to survive don't come as a surprise at all. It's legal to say that everyone is in panic mode at the moment because these companies are perfectly aware that the Chinese EV market is way worse than everyone thought. Thanks for watching and see you next time.